My name is Lisa. I'm 38 years old, and if there's one thing I can say with certainty, it's that family means everything to me. I've been married to my husband Daniel for 14 years, and we have two amazing kids, our daughter Emma, who just turned 20, and our youngest Josh, who's 9. Life isn't always perfect, but I can say with all my heart that I love the life we've built together. We recently moved to a new city, a fresh start for all of us. Daniel got a great job opportunity, and we found a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood with big oak trees lining the streets and kids riding their bikes after school. It felt like the perfect place to raise a family. Of course, moving wasn't easy, especially for the kids. Emma, being older, adapted quickly. She made friends right away, started playing soccer at her new school, and within weeks she was already inviting classmates over for sleepovers. Josh, though, it was harder for him. He's always been a little more shy, sensitive. He's the kind of kid who still holds my hand when we walk through the grocery store. He loves reading, building Legos, and drawing superheroes. He's got the biggest heart, always wanting to help, always looking out for others. So when he started school, I worried. Would he make friends? Would he find his place? At first, he seemed okay. Every day when I picked him up, I'd ask how his day went. He'd shrug and say, "It was fine." But as the weeks went on, I noticed something was off. Josh started coming home quieter than usual. He wasn't excited about school anymore. He stopped talking about his classmates. At first, I thought it was just adjusting to a new environment. Moving is hard, especially for kids. But then, I noticed the bruises. The first time, it was a small mark on his arm. I asked him what happened, and he mumbled something about falling during recess. I didn't think much of it. Kids fall, kids get hurt, it happens. But then, a week later, I saw another bruise, this time on his ribs. "Josh, sweetheart, what happened?" He hesitated. "I don't know. I think I bumped into something." That's when I knew. Something wasn't right. At dinner that night, I casually asked about his classmates. "So, who do you sit with at lunch?" Just some kids." He barely looked up from his plate. "Do you have any close friends yet?" He just shrugged. I exchanged a glance with Daniel, who was watching Josh closely. We both knew something was going on. The next day, when I dropped him off at school, I lingered longer than usual. I watched as he walked toward the entrance, his backpack hanging off one shoulder. Just as he reached the doors, another boy stepped in front of him. A bigger boy. Josh stopped. His posture shrank. The boy said something to him, grinning. Josh didn't respond. He just lowered his head and tried to step around him. But the boy stuck his foot out, causing Josh to stumble. Josh fell forward, his backpack slipping from his shoulders and spilling onto the ground. The other boy let out a laugh. I felt a surge of frustration and concern rise in my chest. Without even thinking, I stepped out of the car, ready to help. But before I could reach him, Josh was already scrambling to his feet, hurriedly gathering his things. Then I saw the expression on his face. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was acceptance, like this had happened before, like he had come to expect it. And that's when I knew. This wasn't an isolated incident. It had been happening for weeks. My heart ached for him, but my resolve hardened. I walked straight into the front office, determined to speak to someone. The receptionist greeted me with a polite but neutral expression, as if this was just another routine conversation. "Mrs. Parker, is there something I can assist you with?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to understand why my son is being repeatedly mistreated at school, and why nothing is being done about it." She gave a small sigh before responding. "Let me check if the principal is available." I sat in the waiting area for 20 minutes. When I was finally called into the office, I could already sense how the conversation was going to go. "Mrs. Parker, we take all student concerns seriously," the principal began. "But you have to understand, sometimes children have disagreements." I frowned. "Disagreements?" He nodded. "At this age, kids are still learning how to interact. We encourage them to resolve conflicts among themselves before we intervene. So at what point does it become something you step in for, when my son comes home visibly hurt?" He hesitated for a moment before sighing. "We've been made aware of some small incidents, but I wouldn't consider them bullying." We have spoken to the other student, and he comes from a good family. His father is a well-respected attorney in the community." And there it was. The real reason nothing was being done. This wasn't about school policy, it was about privilege. The other child had a father with influence, someone the school didn't want to upset. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I see," I said evenly. "Well, if the school isn't going to address this properly, I will." I walked out, my mind already forming a plan. They thought they could ignore this because of who the other child's father was. They didn't realize they were underestimating me. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, my thoughts wouldn't settle. Daniel sat across from me, watching as I typed furiously on my laptop. I wasn't just upset, I was determined. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Gathering information," I replied without looking up. I started compiling everything, every bruise, every sign of distress Josh had shown, every little thing he had mentioned, even when he had brushed it off, like it was nothing. Then I turned to Daniel. "We need to talk to Josh. We need to know exactly what's been happening." Daniel nodded, and we called Josh into the living room. He sat down, looking between us, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Are you mad at me?" he asked quietly. My heart broke a little. "Oh, sweetheart, no," I said, kneeling in front of him. "We're not mad. We just want to understand what's going on at school." He shrugged. "It's fine," he muttered. "Josh," Daniel said gently, "we saw what happened today." Josh tensed. "It's not a big deal," he mumbled. I took his hands in mine. "Honey, I need you to be honest with us. Has this been happening for a while?" A long silence. Then finally, he nodded. "Since we moved here," he admitted. "And it's the same kid every time?" Daniel asked. Another nod. "His name is Brandon," Josh said. "He's in my class. He always picks on me, pushes me in the hallway, takes my lunch sometimes, calls me names." I felt my hands clench into fists. "And the teachers? Have you told anyone?" Josh hesitated. "Once, but the teacher said I should just ignore him." I could barely contain my anger. Daniel rubbed his jaw. "Josh, listen to me. You don't deserve this. None of this is okay. And we're going to make sure it stops." Josh looked up at us, uncertain. "But his dad is a lawyer. The teachers say he's important." That's when I realized something. Even at 9 years old, Josh had already picked up on the unspoken rules of power. Brandon's father was important, which meant Brandon could do whatever he wanted. Well, not anymore. I looked at Daniel and I knew we were on the same page. We weren't just going to stop this. We were going to make sure Brandon and his father never got away with something like this again. That night, Daniel and I put together a plan. First, we gathered evidence. I went through Josh's school emails, looking for anything that mentioned Brandon. I found 2 instances where Josh had told a teacher that Brandon was bothering him, both of which had been ignored. I also took photos of his bruises and made notes with dates of when they had appeared. Then, we started digging into Brandon's father. His name was Mark Calloway. He was a defense attorney, well known in the community for handling high-profile cases. He had the reputation of being untouchable, and it was clear that he had taught his son the same lesson. But here's the thing about powerful people. They rely on silence. They rely on people not fighting back. I had no intention of staying silent. The next morning, I drafted an official complaint letter to the school, outlining everything. Dates, incidents, lack of intervention, and clear negligence on their part. Then, Daniel called an education attorney. "They're letting a known bully torment our son because they don't want to upset his father," Daniel explained. "We need to know what our legal options are." The attorney didn't hesitate. "If the school refuses to act, you have grounds for a lawsuit." That was all we needed to hear. I sent the complaint letter to the school board, the superintendent, and the PTA. I also CC'd the local newspaper. Because if the school wasn't going to take this seriously, I was going to make sure the whole town knew. By noon, my phone rang. It was the principal. "Mrs. Parker, I just received your email. I wish you had come to me first." I did. I cut him off. And you dismissed me. He fumbled for words. We'd like to set up a meeting to discuss this further. Oh, we will, and I'll be bringing my attorney. Silence. Then, finally, we'll be in touch soon. I hung up and looked at Daniel. Now let's see how untouchable Mark Calloway really is. The day of the meeting arrived and I was more than ready. Daniel and I walked into the principal's office together, our attorney, Mr. Lawson, right by our side. I could tell immediately that the school had underestimated us. The principal, Mr. Reynolds, looked nervous. The vice principal was there too, along with a school district representative I hadn't met before, and, of course, Mark Calloway was sitting there, his face smug, arms crossed like he had already won. But I had no intention of letting him win. Mrs. Parker, the principal began, we understand you have some concerns regarding your son's experience here at school. I leaned forward. Concerns is an interesting word choice. My son has been bullied for months. He's been physically hurt, humiliated, and ignored when he asked for help, and the school has done nothing. The district representative, a woman named Ms. Howard, cleared her throat. We take bullying very seriously. No, you don't, I cut in. If you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Mark let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Lisa, let's not blow this out of proportion. Boys will be boys. I'm sure your son is just sensitive. Brandon is a great kid. He would never... I turned to our lawyer. Mr. Lawson, would you care to read the list of documented incidents? Without hesitation, he pulled out a folder and began reading. September 14th. Josh reported being pushed in the hallway. No action was taken. September 28th. Josh's lunch was taken from him. No action was taken. October the 5th. Josh tripped in the cafeteria, resulting in minor injuries. No action was taken. October 17th. Josh was involved in an incident on the playground. It was noted as typical peer conflict. October 30th. Josh came home with noticeable bruises. The school was informed, but there was no follow-up. The list continued. When Lawson finished, the room was quiet. Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a slight smirk. That's it, he said, shaking his head. So your son had a few tough days. I don't see why this is being turned into such a big issue. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm and steady. Mark, this isn't just about Josh. This is about the fact that your son believes he can behave this way without consequences because he knows you'll always step in to protect him. Mark let out a short breath, shaking his head. Brandon is a strong-willed kid. Other students look up to him. If Josh is having difficulties, maybe that's something he needs guidance on. Daniel, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. Let's be honest about what's happening here, he said, his voice level but firm. You've leveraged your position to make sure your son is shielded from accountability, and until now that approach has worked. Mark raised an eyebrow, sitting up slightly. And what exactly do you think you're going to do about it? That's when Lawson set down his pen and spoke clearly and deliberately. Mr. Calloway, if this school does not take immediate corrective action, we will be moving forward with a formal legal complaint citing negligence. Additionally, we will be requesting an independent review of how bullying complaints have been handled across the district. Mark's expression shifted. The principal straightened in his seat, clearly uneasy. A legal complaint? The principal asked, his voice a bit unsteady. Now, let's not be too quick to escalate this. This isn't an overreaction, I said. This is holding people accountable. Mark was visibly frustrated now. You think you can pressure me? He asked, his tone sharp. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Neither do you, Daniel replied steadily. You think your name shields you from scrutiny? We've already submitted copies of these complaints to the district office. The PTA is aware. And we've also reached out to the local press to highlight how this issue has been ignored. Mark's posture stiffened, his face visibly tense. You wouldn't do that. I met his gaze without hesitation. Try me. Silence settled over the room. The principal cleared his throat. I believe it's clear that we need to take appropriate steps, he said quickly, his eyes darting to the district representative. Effective immediately, we will be conducting a thorough review and making necessary changes to ensure that all students feel safe at school. Mark exhaled sharply but said nothing. For the first time, he realized this was a fight he wasn't going to win. Brandon will be suspended effective immediately while we conduct a thorough review. Mark's head snapped toward him. Are you serious? Mr. Calloway, Ms. Howard, the district rep, finally spoke. This situation is bigger than just your son now. If we don't act, the entire school will be under scrutiny. We have no choice. Mark looked like he wanted to explode, but he could see it now. He had lost. Brandon was suspended. The school was forced to implement new anti-bullying policies. And Mark? Mark made one last desperate mistake. Instead of accepting responsibility, he tried to threaten the school board. He pulled strings, called in favors, but it didn't work. Because this time, people were watching. Within weeks, Mark's reputation started to crumble. Parents began speaking up about other incidents involving his son. Clients at his law firm started distancing themselves. And then came the final blow. Rumors started circulating that his firm was considering letting him go. Too much bad press, too much attention. Mark wasn't untouchable anymore. And 1 month later, he and his family moved out of town. Brandon, the untouchable bully, was now the one being forced to start over. Justice had been served. And Josh? He finally went to school without fear. After Mark and his family left town, everything changed. For the first time since we moved, Josh wasn't afraid to go to school. He started eating his lunch without looking over his shoulder. He stopped flinching when another kid ran past him too fast. He finally made friends, real ones, kids who liked him for who he was, not ones who used fear to control him. And me? I finally felt at peace. For months I had worried, fought, lost sleep over how to protect my son in a place that was supposed to be safe. And now I knew I had done the right thing. But what I didn't expect was the reaction from the other parents. One by one, mums and dads started coming up to me at pickup, at PTA meetings, even at the grocery store. I heard about what you did, one mother said. You have no idea how long we've been waiting for someone to stand up to the Calloways. We pulled our daughter out of that school last year because of Brandon, another parent admitted. We didn't think we had a choice. Thank you for proving that we did. It turned out Josh wasn't the first victim. Brandon had been bullying kids for years, but no one had spoken up because of who his father was. Until now. I wasn't just proud of myself. I was proud of Josh. Because even though he had been through something terrible, he came out stronger. One night, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, are bad people always going to lose in the end?" I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Not always, I admitted. But the good people, the ones who stand up for themselves, they win where it matters. Josh thought about that, then nodded. Yeah, I think we won. And he was right. We had won. And more importantly, Josh knew he would never have to fight alone again. Life settled into a new kind of normal. The kind where I didn't wake up every morning wondering if my son was going to be hurt that day. The kind where I didn't have to fight for basic decency from a school that should have protected him from the start. Josh blossomed. He started waking up excited for school, something I hadn't seen in months. He joined an after-school science club, made real friends, and came home smiling instead of silent. One day, while I was making dinner, he sat at the kitchen table, scribbling away in his notebook. "What are you working on?" I asked. "A story," he said without looking up. "Oh yeah? What's it about?" He glanced at me with a little smile. "A superhero." "A superhero?" I smiled. "What's his power?" Josh tapped his pencil against the paper. "He doesn't let bad guys win." I felt my throat tighten. That sounds like a great hero. He nodded and went back to writing. I didn't need to ask who the bad guy was in his story, or who the hero was, because I already knew. This experience changed us. It made Josh stronger. It made me bolder. And it made me realize something I should have known all along. No one has the right to make you feel powerless. Not a school, not a bully, not a man who thinks his name makes him untouchable. And to any parent out there wondering if they should step up, if they should fight back, if they should make a scene, let me tell you this. Do it. Because if I had stayed silent, if I had let fear stop me, Josh would still be waking up every morning, dreading school. But now, my son knows that when someone tries to hurt him, he has a mother who will burn the world down before she lets it happen. And that's a lesson he'll carry with him forever. Life after everything that happened at Josh's school felt lighter. Not just for him, but for all of us. The weight I had been carrying for months, that constant knot of stress in my stomach, was finally gone. Josh was thriving. Emma, my oldest, was also doing great. She had made solid friendships, was doing well in soccer, and had already started talking about college even though she was only 12. Daniel and we were stronger than ever. This whole experience had reminded both of us that we made a damn good team. Through all of it, the frustration, the sleepless nights, the meetings, the fight to protect Josh, he had stood beside me every step of the way. And now, with the stress behind us, we could actually breathe again. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Daniel and I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset, wine glasses in hand. We did good, he said, swirling his drink. Yeah, I agreed, leaning my head on his shoulder. We did. We weren't just parents, we were partners. And I was grateful for this life, grateful for the family we had built, grateful that my kids knew that no matter what, we would always have their backs. A few weeks later, I ran into one of the mums from school at the grocery store. "Lisa," she called out, pushing her cart over. I smiled, expecting small talk, but then she said something that caught me off guard. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to them," she said, shifting the basket in her hands. "My son wasn't in Josh's grade, but he had his own problems with that family. You did what a lot of us were afraid to do." I felt something warm spread in my chest. "Well," I said, "someone had to do it." She smiled. "And you did." I walked out of the store that day feeling something I hadn't expected. Not just relief, but pride. Because I hadn't just fought for Josh. I had fought for every kid who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or told that boys will be boys. And knowing that, that was a feeling I would carry with me forever.